History is a fickle thing. It records the deeds of kings and the songs of heroes, but it does not always tell the truth. Some names are carved into stone, while others are erased before they can ever be spoken. Jon Snow was one such name. A name that history did not recognize, a name that was never meant to be. He was neither a king nor a prince, neither a hero nor a villain. He was a ghost, a whisper in the cold wind, a shadow cast by a secret that should have died with the fall of a dynasty. But secrets have a way of surviving, like embers buried beneath the ashes, waiting for the right breath of air to reignite them before the world knew him as a sworn brother of the Night's Watch, before he held a blade of Valyrian steel against the dead, before he was forced to end the life of a queen who loved him. He was only a boy raised in the halls of Winterfell, burdened with a name that was never his own. And yet, even in his exile, even in his vanishing, his story has never truly ended. Because some names, no matter how deeply buried, refuse to be forgotten. Jon Snow was raised in the halls of Winterfell, but he was never truly of it. He walked among the sons of Eddard Stark, but he would never share their name. A boy with dark curls and solemn eyes, bearing the weight of a title that marked him as lesser, a bastard. He learned early that his place was different. He was not Robb Stark, heir to the North, nor was he Arya, reckless and free. He was the quiet one, the careful one, the boy who knew he could not afford to make mistakes. His very existence was a reminder of something unspoken, something shameful. The world told him that he was unwanted, that his birth was a stain upon his father's honor. And so Jon did what all unwanted sons do. He sought purpose elsewhere. He looked beyond Winterfell's walls, beyond the expectations he could never meet. He sought duty, belonging, a place where names did not matter. The Night's Watch offered him that escape, the black cloak, the oath, the promise that he would be part of something greater. He told himself that it was a choice, that it was his path. But fate had other plans, because Jon Snow was never meant to take the black. He was meant for something else entirely. Long before Jon Snow drew his first breath, a prophecy was spoken, a tale of fire and ice, of a hero who would be born amidst salt and smoke, destined to stand against the darkness. The prince that was promised. Some believed the prophecy spoke of Rhaegar Targaryen, others whispered of Daenerys Stormborn. But the gods are cruel, and fate is rarely kind to those burdened with destiny. Rhaegar had searched for the Chosen One all his life. He believed that his firstborn son, Rhaenys, would be the savior. When she perished in the fall of King's Landing, his hopes turned to Aegon, his second son. But fate had already moved past them, weaving a different tale. It was not Rhaegar's children who would rise from the shadows of prophecy. It was the child no one knew existed, the son of fire and ice, hidden in the last place anyone would think to look. Born in secrecy, protected by a brother's vow, Jon Snow was never meant to live as a bastard. His blood carried the echoes of kings and conquerors, of dragons and dire wolves. He was the last flicker of a dynasty thought to be extinguished. But prophecy does not guarantee a crown. It does not promise victory, nor does it shield one from tragedy. And as Jon Snow stood on the precipice of his fate, he would come to learn one terrible truth. Prophecies are not gifts. They are curses, and they do not choose their champions with kindness. Some are meant to save the world, others are meant to be sacrificed for it. Jon Snow would soon discover which fate belonged to him. In the histories of Westeros, some names are sung in great halls, carved into stone and remembered by generations. Others are whispered in the dark, buried beneath the weight of lies and forgotten truths. Jon Snow's story did not begin in Winterfell. It did not begin with Eddard Stark's solemn vow, nor with a bastard boy staring across the frozen plains of the north. His story began in a secret love, in the meeting of fire and ice, in a union that was never meant to be. Rhaegar Targaryen, firstborn son of the Mad King, was a man of prophecy, a prince who did not crave war, but sought the meaning hidden within ancient texts. He was a warrior, but more than that, he was a dreamer, a man who believed that fate was already written and that he had a role to play. He was meant to bring forth the prince that was promised, a savior who would stand against the darkness. But fate is cruel, and destiny is rarely kind. Lyanna Stark, daughter of the North, was never meant to be his queen. She was promised to another, bound to a life that was expected of her. But love does not heed the rules of men, nor does prophecy wait for the approval of kings. And so, beneath the cover of secrecy, Rhaegar and Lyanna vanished into the mist of history, leaving behind a war that would change the realm forever. The world called it an abduction. They painted Rhaegar as a villain, Lyanna as a helpless captive. But the truth, like all dangerous truths, was buried in the blood-soaked ground of rebellion. In the quiet, hidden shadows of the Tower of Joy, a child was born. A child with the blood of dragons and wolves. A child who should have been a prince, but who instead became a nameless boy, cast into the world with no claim, no birthright, no truth. Jon Snow. A name that was never his. A destiny that had yet to be revealed. For history had not forgotten him. It had only been waiting. Prophecies are cruel things. They do not bend to the desires of men, nor do they grant their champions a path free of suffering. They are riddles wrapped in fate, twisted by time, their meaning ever-changing like shadows cast upon a wall. For centuries, the prophecy of the prince that was promised echoed through the halls of scholars and the minds of kings. It spoke of a savior, a warrior born amidst salt and smoke, who would stand against the encroaching darkness and wield a blade of fire to drive it back. Rhaegar Targaryen was not the first to believe in the prophecy, but he was the first to stake his life upon it. He had been a different man in his youth. Gentle, thoughtful, a prince more suited to music than to war. But something changed. As he pored over the scrolls of ancient Valyria, as he read of the doom and the long night, he became consumed by a single question. Am I the one? The thought festered in his mind, altering his very nature. The harpist became a warrior. The dreamer became a man burdened by destiny. But as years passed, a greater fear took root. What if I am not? Rhaegar turned to his children, believing the answer lay not within himself, but in his bloodline. At first he thought it was Rhaenys, his daughter, then Aegon, his son. But war shattered those dreams before he could see them through. The rebellion came, the Targaryen dynasty crumbled, and his hopes perished in fire and steel. And yet, prophecy does not die so easily. For unbeknownst to the world, as Rhaegar met his end upon the trident, another child, his true heir, drew his first breath within the Tower of Joy. A child born of salt and tears, hidden from the wrath of kings, his very existence a secret carried only by the dead. Jon Snow. But if he was the promised prince, why was his life one of exile and solitude? Why did his path lead not to a throne, but to the frozen wastelands of the Wall? Was fate guiding him toward his purpose, or had the prophecy been misunderstood all along? For what is a prophecy but a story yet to be told, a song waiting to be sung? And what if the song of ice and fire was not about a single savior, but a sacrifice? Some men are born to rule, others are born to burn. Jon Snow's destiny had yet to decide which one he would become. Some love stories are celebrated in song, Others are whispered in the dark, spoken only in the hush of those who remember. But there are some that leave behind no melody, only silence, an echo of what was lost, a wound upon history that never truly heals. Such was the love of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. A crown prince and a northern girl, a dragon and a wolf. Two souls bound by fate, drawn together by forces that neither they nor the world around them could understand. Their love did not begin in violence, as the tales of conquerors so often do. It did not begin in ambition or the lust for power. It began in quiet defiance, in stolen moments, in a song that only they could hear. But the world does not look kindly upon love that rewrites destiny. To the realm, Rhaegar was the heir to the Iron Throne, bound by duty to his wife, Aelia Martell of Dorne. Lyanna was the daughter of a great house, promised to Robert Baratheon, a man who loved her with a fire that consumed everything in its path. They were both expected to play their roles, to live out the lives that had been chosen for them. But love is a force more dangerous than prophecy, more unpredictable than war. When Rhaegar placed a crown of winter roses upon Lyanna's head at the great tourney of Harrenhal, he unknowingly sealed the fate of a kingdom. That single act, witnessed by lords and knights, was more than mere admiration. It was a proclamation. The moment he laid that crown upon her brow, the realm was set ablaze. Some say Lyanna was stolen, carried away by Rhaegar against her will, locked away in the Tower of Joy. Others claim she went willingly, drawn to the Dragon Prince by a love neither could deny. The truth is buried beneath the blood of thousands, lost in the ashes of rebellion. But the consequences were undeniable. Robert Baratheon, a man who had loved Lyanna with a warrior's fury, raised his hammer and waged war. Her brother, Brandon Stark, rode to King's Landing demanding her return, only to find himself strangled by the very throne he sought justice from. Lord Rickard Stark, her father, was burned alive as a laughing Mad King watched. And so the realm turned upon itself. Houses rose and fell, banners were torn from the sky, and the might of the Targaryens, a dynasty that had ruled for centuries, was undone not by dragons, nor by steel, but by love. Was it truly love that doomed them? Or was it something else, something deeper, something older? Perhaps it was never truly love that burned away the last days of the Dragon Lords. Perhaps it was prophecy weaving its course, fate setting the world upon the path it had long ago chosen. Perhaps Rhaegar and Lyanna were only the final embers of a fire that had been dying for generations. Or perhaps their love was not the end at all. Perhaps it was the beginning of something greater. For as the last flames of House Targaryen flickered and died, a single spark remained, hidden in the tower where Lyanna Stark drew her final breath. A child, born in secrecy, with the blood of dragons and wolves alike. A child who would one day be known as Jon Snow. And so the love that destroyed a kingdom left behind something far more powerful. A boy who would carry the weight of two legacies, never knowing the truth of the love that created him, nor the war that was fought in his name. The Targaryens had fallen, but their story was not over. Not yet. Some secrets are carved into stone, meant to be remembered for all time. Others are swallowed by the past, buried beneath the weight of war, lost in the silence of the dead. But the most dangerous secrets, the ones that shape the fate of empires, are neither carved nor buried. They are hidden. And there, atop a lonely hill in the red mountains of Dorne, a secret awaited its reckoning. The Tower of Joy. A place of sorrow, of bloodshed, of quiet whispers drowned by the screams of dying men. To the world, it was nothing more than a forgotten ruin, a relic of no importance. But within those cold, gray walls, history was rewritten. It was here that the last battle of Robert's rebellion was fought. Not upon the fields of the Trident, not in the shadow of the Red Keep, but in a place no songs would remember. When the war was all but won, when the mad king lay slain in his halls, and the throne had passed into new hands, Eddard Stark rode south. Not as a victor, not as a conqueror, but as a brother, seeking the one person he had sworn to protect, Lyanna. For years the world had spoken of her abduction, of the dragon prince who had stolen her away, of the war that had been waged in her name. But war is built on half-truths, and the blood it spills washes away the voices of those who can no longer speak. Lyanna had not been stolen. She had fled. She had chosen. And now she lay dying. Ned found her in the tower's highest chamber, pale as freshly fallen snow, her body weak from the trial of childbirth. The scent of blood and roses filled the air, and in her arms, wrapped in soft linen, lay a child. A boy with dark hair and solemn eyes. A child born of fire and ice. She looked upon her brother with pleading eyes, her strength fading with every breath, and with the last of her voice, she spoke the words that would haunt him for the rest of his days. "Promise me, Ned." 3 words, nothing more. But within them, a burden heavier than any crown. The world would never know the truth. They would never know that Rhaegar Targaryen's last son had not died with his siblings in the sack of King's Landing. They would never know that the war they had fought, the blood they had spilled, had been built upon a lie. Robert Baratheon would never know that the woman he had loved had died not as a captive, but as a mother. That the child she bore was the son of the very man he had sworn to destroy. If the boy lived as a Targaryen, he would die as a Targaryen. So Ned Stark did what he had always done. He chose duty over desire, honor over truth. He took the child in his arms, knowing that to speak his name aloud would mean his death. And so the last son of Rhaegar Targaryen was given a new name, Jon Snow, a bastard of Winterfell, a child without claim, without legacy, without the truth of his own blood. The secret of his birth had been sealed within those gray stone walls, hidden beneath the dust of fallen swords and the bodies of dead men. The Tower of Joy had fallen silent, and history, as always, had moved on. Oaths are the foundation of the world. They bind kings to their thrones, warriors to their swords, and men to the burdens they cannot lay down. Some oaths are made in the light, spoken before gods and men, written into the very fabric of history. Others are whispered in the dark, sealed in blood, meant to be carried to the grave. Eddard Stark made such an oath. When he rode south to the Tower of Joy, he did not go as a warrior, nor as a lord seeking vengeance. He went as a brother, as a man who had spent months chasing the ghost of his sister across a kingdom bathed in war. He went searching for Lyanna, the sister he had sworn to protect. But when he found her, he did not find the wild, laughing girl who had once raced him through the godswood of Winterfell. He found a pale, dying woman, cradling a newborn child in her trembling arms. A child with dark hair, a solemn gaze, so small, so fragile, yet already bearing the weight of a kingdom's fury. And in that moment, the world changed. Lyanna Stark had always been strong, a wolf of the north, unafraid of storms. But now, her voice was barely a whisper, her strength draining as swiftly as the blood that stained the sheets beneath her. With fading breath, she gave her son to Ned, her trembling fingers grasping at his, as if the weight of her soul rested in what she would ask of him next. "Promise me, Ned." 3 words. Simple, yet heavier than any crown. She did not need to say more. Ned understood. If Robert Baratheon ever learned the truth, if he ever discovered that Rhaegar Targaryen's last son still lived, the boy would not see his first winter. The war had not ended. It had merely shifted. The dragon was dead, but its embers still smoldered, and Robert would see them stamped out before they could ever spark anew. Ned Stark had never been a liar. He was a man of honor, bound to the old ways of the North, a man who spoke the truth even when it cost him dearly. But in that moment, honor meant nothing. Truth meant nothing. Only the child in his arms mattered. And so the proud Lord of Winterfell, the Warden of the North, became a liar. He rode home with a boy who was not his son, carrying a secret that could shake the very foundation of the realm. He called the child Jon, a name simple and unassuming, a name that carried no banners, no legacies, no claims to the past. He gave him the name Snow, marking him a bastard of the North, condemning him to a life of quiet exile within the halls of Winterfell. It was the only way to keep him safe. For years, Ned bore the weight of that lie, a wound that festered in silence. He endured the whispers of his bannermen, the cold stares of his wife, the questions in Jon's own eyes. He never answered them. He never could. The truth was a blade that could cut down everything he had sworn to protect. The North called him a man of honor. They sang of his justice, his unshakable integrity. But honor is not always truth. And Ned Stark, the last man in Westeros who would ever break an oath, carried one that would follow him to the grave. A secret that shaped the life of a boy who would never know his own name. History doesn't remember all who are born into it. Some are raised to be kings, their names etched into stone, their destinies woven into the very fabric of the world. Others are cast aside, their blood no less noble, yet their existence reduced to whispers. Jon Snow was never meant to be a bastard. He was the last son of Rhaegar Targaryen, heir to the Iron Throne, a prince by blood and legacy. But he did not grow up in the halls of Dragonstone, nor did he learn the histories of his forebears in the shadow of the Iron Throne. He did not ride dragons or wield the power of his ancestors. Instead, he was raised as a child of the North, marked by the name Snow, a reminder that he was an outsider even in the only home he had ever known. He walked the halls of Winterfell, yet he would never inherit them. He bore the Stark look, yet he was never truly a Stark. His father, the world believed, was Eddard Stark, a man whose honor was the stuff of legends. And yet Jon alone was the stain upon that honor, the single mistake in an otherwise unblemished legacy. But was it truly a mistake? He was not the first heir to live in the shadow of lies. Throughout the histories of Westeros, there were others. Kings who should have ruled but never did. Princes whose blood was strong, yet whose names were buried by time. The Blackfyres, once the proud rivals of House Targaryen, now nothing but a memory. The lost children of Harrenhal, wiped away as if they had never been. The whispered heirs of the Durrandon kings, their lines extinguished before they could rise, and the last prince of the Dragon Lords, hidden from the world in a tower of stone, only to be cast into obscurity the moment he was born. But history has a way of correcting itself. It does not forget bloodlines so easily. Some truths are too powerful to remain buried forever. What then did Jon Snow's bloodline still mean for the realm? His existence alone was proof that the Targaryens had not truly perished. That fire still ran in the veins of men who did not know their own power. That the song of ice and fire had not yet reached its final verse. He had been raised to believe he was nothing. That he was a bastard, unworthy of a name, undeserving of a legacy. But the blood that ran through his veins told a different story. And blood has a way of making itself known. For lost heirs do not always remain lost. Some, when the time comes, are found. Winterfell was a place of honor, of tradition, of unbroken bloodlines stretching back thousands of years. The great house of Stark, rulers of the North, bore a name that commanded loyalty and respect, a name tied to the very land itself. But Jon Snow did not share that name. He walked the same halls, trained in the same yard, and bled on the same frost-covered stones, but he was not one of them. A bastard, that was what they called him, a word that clung to him like a second skin, a mark upon his existence that he could never wash away. He had known it from the moment he could understand speech. He heard it in the whispers of lords and ladies who looked upon him with veiled contempt, in the sharp words of Catelyn Stark, who saw him as an intruder in her home. Even in the silence of his father's lips, there was a quiet confirmation, an absence of the truth he longed to hear. Robb was the heir. Bran and Rickon were true-born sons. Even Arya, wild and restless, was still a Stark. But Jon was a question left unanswered, a shadow upon the noble lineage of Winterfell. The North was a place of hard men, where honor was valued above all else. And yet, Jon was living proof that even the most honorable of men, Eddard Stark, the Warden of the North, had stumbled. That was what they believed. That was what he was told. But the truth was more complicated. He did not know that he was no stain upon his father's honor. He did not know that his name was not his own, that his bloodline carried the weight of a dynasty long thought to be extinguished. He did not know that the whispers behind his back, the sidelong glances, the weight of his own isolation, all of it was the price of a secret greater than he could ever imagine. All he knew was that he did not belong. And so Jon Snow did what those without a name must do. He trained harder, fought longer, tried to prove his worth to a world that had already decided he had none. He longed for something beyond Winterfell's walls, for a place where his birth would not define him. But where does a bastard belong? That was a question Jon Snow had spent his whole life asking. And soon, he would find his answer in the cold, unforgiving shadows beyond the wall. Blood is more than a lineage. It is history, power, and the silent force that shapes the destinies of those who carry it. Some are born into their legacies, raised to wear crowns and wield banners. Others inherit them unknowingly, bearing the weight of forgotten names, never realizing the ghosts that walk beside them. Jon Snow was the latter. The world saw him as a bastard, the stain upon Eddard Stark's honor, an unwanted child who had no place among the highborn. He believed it himself. He had grown up knowing he would never sit at his father's table as an equal, that he would never bear the direwolf sigil with pride, that Winterfell would never truly be his home. But the world was wrong. He was no bastard. He was the last son of House Targaryen, the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. His blood carried the weight of two great houses, Stark and Targaryen, ice and fire, the wolf and the dragon. He was not an outsider. He was the very thing that Westeros had been waiting for. And yet, no one, not even Jon himself, knew it. Fate is a cruel architect, shaping destinies through deception and silence. The boy who longed for a name had been given one that was false. The father he swore to honor had never been his father at all. The home he had loved had been a refuge built upon a lie. And yet blood speaks, not in words nor in heraldry, but in the way it pulls its bearer toward their fate. Jon Snow was drawn to the wall not just because he longed for purpose, but because his blood carried the echoes of duty. His father, Rhaegar, had spent his life searching for prophecy, believing in a destiny greater than himself. And now, his son, unaware of the legacy he carried, was unknowingly walking the same path, bound to a war that stretched beyond thrones and crowns into the realm of ice and death itself. If he had known the truth, would he have chosen differently? Would he have claimed the name that was rightfully his? Would he have stood as Aegon Targaryen, last of his house? Or would he have turned away from the destiny written in his blood? Perhaps it did not matter, because some fates cannot be escaped. Some truths, no matter how long they are buried, will rise. And Jon Snow, Bastard of Winterfell, brother of the Night's Watch, heir to a forgotten throne, was already walking toward the day when his bloodline would no longer remain unseen. The world did not yet know his name, but soon it would. Some men seek glory, others seek power, but there are those who seek nothing at all, only a place where they might belong. Jon Snow had spent his life searching. Winterfell had been his home, but never his kingdom. Its halls were filled with honor, its banners carried the weight of legacy, but none of it belonged to him. He was not a Stark. He was not a son. He was a shadow cast by a secret he did not understand, a boy whose very presence reminded others of a past they wished to forget. And so, when the choice was given to him, to stay in a place where he would never be more than a guest, or to leave and forge his own fate, Jon Snow did what all lost souls do. He ran. But he did not run south, to the courts of lords and kings. He did not seek adventure or riches or vengeance. He went north, to the Wall. The Wall, a monolithic grave of ice and stone where men lived and died in anonymity, a place where names meant nothing, where bastards and broken things could find purpose, a prison to some, a sanctuary to others. Jon had been told it was an honorable duty, that the Night's Watch was a noble order, sworn to protect the realm from the evils beyond. But when he arrived, he found no noble warriors, no grand brotherhood of legendary men. He found thieves and murderers, outcasts and unwanted sons, the forgotten and the forsaken, standing guard over a kingdom that had already forgotten them. And he was one of them now. At first, he thought it was his own choice, his decision, his sacrifice. But fate has a way of shaping men without them realizing it. Perhaps he had never truly chosen this path. Perhaps it had been calling him all along. For the blood in his veins was not only that of wolves, but of dragons. His father had spent his life chasing prophecy, believing in destiny. And now Jon was walking the same path, unknowingly answering the same call. Was it duty that brought him here? Or was it something greater? Some men are born to rule, others are born to fight, and some are born to stand between the living and the dead, not as kings, not as warriors, but as something else entirely. Jon Snow had left behind Winterfell, but Winterfell had never been his home. His home lay in the cold, in the darkness, beyond the gates of men. The Wall was waiting, and soon so would the things that lurked beyond it. Some men are born to shape their own destinies. Others are swept along by the currents of fate, their paths written long before they draw breath. Jon Snow had always believed himself to be the former, a man who made his own choices, who walked his own road. But what if his journey had never truly been his own? The Wall was not just a fortress of ice. It was a boundary between two worlds, one of men, one of myth. Those who came to its gates were drawn there for different reasons. Some sought redemption, others escape. Some fled justice, others embraced duty. But Jon had always believed he had chosen the Night's Watch, that in leaving Winterfell he had forged a new purpose for himself, that the black cloak on his shoulders was a symbol of his own will, his own sacrifice. But fate does not wait for men to find their own way. Sometimes it pulls them forward long before they know they are moving. Beyond the Wall, an ancient power stirred. The winds whispered with voices long forgotten, The cold carried echoes of a war older than empires. And Jon, a bastard of the north, unknowingly carried the blood of kings, of conquerors and dreamers, of those who had seen the future and sought to shape it. What if his journey was never his to choose? His father, Rhaegar, had been obsessed with prophecy, convinced that his bloodline held the key to the world's salvation. He had died believing he was the one fate had chosen. But prophecy does not belong to those who seek it. It lingers, waits, and moves in the shadows, finding its champion in the most unexpected of places. Had fate whispered in Ned Stark's ear the day he rode from the Tower of Joy, a dying sister's child in his arms? Had it guided Jon's feet as he walked away from Winterfell, burdened by a name that was never truly his? Or was he simply another pawn in a game played by forces beyond his understanding? The gods of old had seen kingdoms rise and fall. They had watched dragons dance and burn, watched men carve thrones from the bones of their enemies. But the true war, the war beyond thrones, beyond crowns, had never ended. And Jon was already walking toward it. He believed he had taken the black to find purpose, to escape the shadow of his illegitimacy. But his blood had already decided his path. For some men, duty is a choice. For others, it is a call written in their very bones. Jon Snow did not yet know the truth of his name, nor the weight of the prophecy he carried. But soon, the world would remind him. Because fate does not ask. It demands. Prophecies are cruel things. They do not offer certainty, only riddles wrapped in fate, waiting for someone to make sense of them. Rhaegar Targaryen had spent his life chasing such riddles. He was not a man driven by conquest, nor by the madness that had consumed his father. He was a scholar, a dreamer, a prince who looked not to the past for power, but to the future for salvation. And in the pages of old Valyrian texts, in the fading words of forgotten seers, he found what he believed to be his purpose. The prince that was promised shall be born amidst salt and smoke, and his song shall be the song of ice and fire. A prophecy older than Rhaegar himself, older than his father's rule, older than the dragons that had once soared above Westeros. A prophecy that whispered of a savior, one who would rise in the world's darkest hour, who would wield fire and stand against the coming cold. Rhaegar had been certain that he was that prince. But when he looked upon himself, he saw no sign of destiny. No visions came to him. No great power stirred in his soul. And so he turned his gaze toward his children. At first he believed it was his daughter, Rhaenys, then his son, Aegon. But war took them both before he could know the truth. And as he died upon the trident, his dreams of prophecy died with him, or so it seemed. For prophecy does not fade with the fall of a single man. It lingers, waiting to be fulfilled. And on the very day that Rhaegar drew his last breath, his true heir, his final hope, was already born in the Tower of Joy. A child of fire and ice. A child with the blood of kings, hidden beneath the name of a bastard. Jon Snow. But had Rhaegar been right? Had he truly seen the future? Or had he only seen what he wished to see? Jon had never thought himself a savior. He was a boy raised in the north, hardened by the cold, defined by the absence of a name. He had never dreamed of destiny, never sought prophecy. He had sworn himself to duty, not knowing that duty had been waiting for him all along. Had he already stepped into the role foretold by his father? Or was fate still unwritten, waiting for its true champion to rise? Prophecies are cruel things. They do not reveal their truths to those who seek them. They reveal themselves only when it is too late to turn back. And for Jon Snow, the path had already begun. The cold had always been there. It crept through the walls of Winterfell, whispered in the wind beyond the wall, lingered in the breath of those who feared what lay beyond the frozen horizon. But this was different. This was not the cold of winter, it was the cold of death. The long night had returned. Jon Snow stood at the heart of it, not as a king, nor as a prince, but as a soldier, a man who had never sought war but had been bound to it all the same. He had fought battles before, had seen men cut down by steel and treachery. But this was no battle of men. This was the end of all things. The dead had come. They moved like a tide, endless and unrelenting, a silent wave of decay and hunger. No banners flew for them, no war cries rang from their lips. They had no reason, no desire, no mercy. Only the cold, only the endless hunger to snuff out the flame of life wherever it still flickered. Jon had seen death before. He had felt its breath on his neck at Hardhome, had faced it in the haunted woods beyond the wall. But never like this. Never in such numbers. Never with such inevitability. The living stood against them, steel and fire in hand, their lines breaking and reforming like fragile glass. The banners of the North, the Vale, the Unsullied, all flying together in the face of something none of them could truly understand. For all his battles, all his struggles, Jon Snow had never felt smaller. This was the moment whispered of in prophecy. The battle Rhaegar Targaryen had spent his life preparing for. The war against the Great Other. The darkness beyond all darkness. Was this why he had been brought back from the dead? To stand here? To fight this battle? Or was fate simply cruel, weaving men's lives into a song they would never truly understand? The weight of 1,000 lifetimes bore down upon him. The echoes of lost kings, forgotten warriors, all those who had fought and failed in the wars before this one. The long night had come again, and if they failed, there would be no dawn. Legends are powerful things. They shape the hearts of men, guide the hands of kings, and whisper of glories yet to come. But they are also dangerous, for legends promise salvation, yet they never guarantee it. For centuries, the prophecy of Azor Ahai had echoed through the halls of Valyria, through the libraries of Maesters, through the fading memories of those who still believed in gods older than time itself. A warrior, reborn in fire, destined to wield a blade of light and stand against the darkness. A savior who would drive back the long night and bring dawn to a world teetering on the edge of oblivion. Some believed Rhaegar Targaryen had been that warrior. Others thought it would be his son. But prophecy is never so simple, never so kind. Jon Snow had never claimed to be a hero. He did not see visions of fire, did not hear the voices of gods. He had not been raised on tales of destiny, nor had he ever sought the weight of prophecy upon his shoulders. Yet the world seemed determined to place it upon him. Born of fire and ice, raised in the frozen halls of Winterfell, he had been shaped by the cold and tested by death itself. He had wielded a blade of Valyrian steel against the dead. He had bled for the living, had led men into battle against forces beyond mortal comprehension. He had walked through fire and returned from death, his soul pulled back from the abyss, as if the gods themselves had refused to let him go. But was he truly the chosen one? If he was, where was his Lightbringer, the legendary sword that would burn against the darkness? Where was the sign that marked him as the warrior the world had been waiting for? Where was the voice of fate telling him that all he had endured had been leading to this moment? There was none. There was only war. Only the clash of steel, the weight of blood, the endless tide of the dead pressing upon the living. Prophecies had been wrong before. Maesters whispered that they were mere myths, stories crafted to give men hope when all else had failed. And what if that was all this was? What if the prophecy of Azor Ahai had been nothing more than a tale, a desperate wish upon the stars that had long since burned out. And if it was only a tale, then what did that make Jon Snow? A warrior, yes. A leader, perhaps. But not a savior. No god had chosen him. No blade had burned in his hands. He was not Azor Ahai. He was a man who had been given no more than duty, who had risen from nothing, who had bled and suffered and lost more than he could bear, not because of prophecy, but because of choice. And perhaps that was the greatest truth of all. Heroes are not born from prophecy. They are made in the moments where no one else will stand. Jon Snow was not a savior sent by the gods. He was something far rarer, a man who had never needed the gods at all. Fire and ice. Two forces forever at odds, bound by fate yet destined to consume one another. Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen, two names forged in war, whispered in prophecy, written in the blood of kings. One a bastard who had never belonged, the other a queen who had lost everything. They should have never met, never crossed paths in the great game that had consumed Westeros for centuries. Yet fate has a cruel sense of humor, and so in the dying embers of a war that had already cost them both more than they could bear, they found each other. Not as conqueror and subject, nor as king and queen, but as something else, something neither of them had ever truly known. Equals. For all her armies, for all her dragons, Daenerys had spent her life alone. The last of her house, wandering across the world like a ghost of a lost dynasty, gathering strength, but never finding a home. She had been raised on whispers of destiny, fed the belief that the throne was hers by right, that the realm would rise to meet her when she returned. But the realm had not risen. It had cowered. It had resisted. And then, in the midst of it all, there was Jon Snow, a man who wanted no throne, no crown, no power, a man whose only loyalty was to the living, to those who stood no chance against the tide of darkness beyond the wall. He had bent the knee, not to ambition, not to bloodlines, but to survival itself. She had seen fire in many men before, but in Jon, she saw something different. She saw ice. Two dragons circling the same sky, drawn together not by choice, but by inevitability. For the first time, Daenerys was not alone. And for the first time, Jon found someone who did not see him as a bastard, as an outcast, but as something more. And so, the wolf and the dragon walked the same path. But love, no matter how strong, does not change the course of fate. Prophecy had bound them together, but prophecy had also sealed their doom. Jon Snow, last son of Rhaegar Targaryen, carried the blood of the very house Daenerys sought to rebuild. He was no mere lover. He was a threat. The true heir. The one who could stand in her way, even if he had never wanted the throne himself. And Daenerys had spent her life believing she was the savior of the realm, the breaker of chains, the mother of dragons who would lead the world into a new age. But what happens when a savior is no longer seen as salvation, when fire, meant to cleanse, instead consumes? Their love had been real, but love is not enough when destiny pulls in different directions. The dragon and the wolf had risen together, but only one would survive the fall. Some betrayals are written in whispers, carried by spies and sealed in ink. Others are written in blood, in the final breath of a fallen ruler, in the cold steel that brings an empire to its knees. Jon Snow's betrayal was written in love. Daenerys Stormborn had conquered Westeros with fire and fury, had stood before the ruined gates of King's Landing with the weight of her ancestors upon her shoulders. She had been the last dragon, the breaker of chains, the queen who had spent her life fighting for a throne she believed was hers by destiny. And now, she stood victorious, her enemies burned to ash, the 7 kingdoms kneeling before her in fear. But fire does not know mercy. Jon had seen the flames consume the innocent, had heard the cries of those who had never lifted a sword against her. He had seen the Queen of Dragons become something else, something her ancestors had once been. And though his heart ached, though he had loved her as deeply as a man could love, he had come to understand the truth. This was not a victory. It was the beginning of something far worse. The Iron Throne, the thing she had fought for, the thing that had stolen her childhood, her family, her very soul, now stood before her, glinting in the broken light of a ruined city. It had cost her everything, and still she had won. But victory had not softened her heart. If anything, it had hardened her further. She spoke of a new world, of a kingdom free of tyrants, of peace born from fire. But Jon knew peace did not come from fear, and so in the shadow of the throne, he made his choice. She trusted him. Even now, when others turned from her in fear, she trusted him. The last man of the North to kneel, the last Stark, no, the last Targaryen, left in her wake. She had asked him to rule beside her, to embrace his own birthright, to take his place in the world she would forge. But he had never wanted a throne. Only peace, only mercy, and mercy, cruel as it may be, sometimes comes in the form of a blade. She did not see it coming. For all her strength, for all her dragons, for all the armies she had commanded, Daenerys Targaryen fell in the arms of the man who loved her, a dagger between her ribs, a gasp of disbelief, and then silence, the last of House Targaryen, the last dragon, gone, and with her, the dream of an empire. Jon did not weep, not because he did not feel the weight of it, not because it did not break him, but because there was no one left to weep for him. The realm would not call him a hero. They would not sing of his sacrifice, nor would they remember the man who killed his queen to save a kingdom that never wanted him as king. He had ended a dynasty. He had betrayed love itself. And for that, he would be remembered as nothing more than a ghost of history, a name whispered in the dark, long after the last embers of fire had faded to cold. Some endings are written in fire, others in blood. But Jon Snow's ending was written in silence. The throne was gone. The war was over. The Dragon Queen was dead. And yet, there was no victory, no cheers, no banners raised in his honor. The world he had saved would not call him king. The realm he had sacrificed for would not remember him as a hero. He had done what he must, what no other could bear to do. But in the end, it had earned him nothing. For the second time in his life, Jon had been sentenced to the wall, not as a brother of the Night's Watch, not as the Lord Commander who had once rallied the living against the dead, but as a man with no place left to go. The realm did not want him. The lords who had once called him king in the north now cast their eyes upon another. The truth of his blood, his Targaryen name, had died with Daenerys. His claim to the throne, once whispered in fear and hope alike, was now buried beneath the ashes of a war that had left Westeros weary and broken. There would be no crown, no kingdom, no place for a man who had been raised a Stark, but born a dragon. So, he left, past the gates of Castle Black, beyond the wall that had once been his prison and his duty, northward into the endless white. He did not look back. For what was there to see? A realm that had forgotten him? A people who had never truly been his own? A throne that had never been his to claim? Number. The past was dust now. The last son of Rhaegar Targaryen faded into the snow, not as a ruler, nor as a hero, but as something else. A ghost. A man with a name that no longer mattered, a bloodline that no longer held power, a legacy that had burned away, leaving only whispers in its place. History would not sing of him. No great statues would be carved in his honor. No scribes would record his deeds in the halls of kings. The last Targaryen had not fallen in battle, nor perished in flames. He had simply disappeared. And perhaps that was the way it was always meant to be. Some men are not born to rule. Some men are not born to be remembered. Some men simply walk away, leaving only footprints in the snow, waiting to be swallowed by time. Some men leave behind kingdoms. Others leave behind legacies. But Jon Snow left behind only silence. There was no throne for him, no crown, no songs sung in his name. The realm did not celebrate his sacrifice, nor mourn his departure. The banners of the north did not rise for him. The halls of Winterfell did not call him home. He had saved the world, but the world had no place for him. And so he rode north, beyond the wall, beyond the land of lords and queens, beyond the histories that had bound his fate since birth. The last time he had stood at the edge of this frozen wasteland, he had been a boy, seeking purpose in a world that had given him none. He had found duty among the black-cloaked sentinels of the wall, had found camaraderie among thieves and outcasts. But that was another life, another Jon Snow, one who had not yet died and returned, one who had not yet learned the terrible weight of prophecy, of love, of betrayal. This time there was no duty, no war to fight, no home to return to, only the cold, only the endless stretch of white where the ghosts of the past whispered in the wind. Some say he vanished into the wilderness, swallowed by the very land he had once sworn to guard. Others say he lived among the free folk, shedding his name, his past, his burdens. A man who had once been called king, now nothing more than a shadow wandering the forgotten edges of the world. But Westeros is a land of stories, of myths that outlive the men who inspire them. And stories of Jon Snow did not fade so easily. There were whispers, years later, of a figure glimpsed in the farthest reaches of the north, a man who did not age, who did not fall to the bitter grasp of winter, a man who walked where no other dared, whose presence alone kept the wild things at bay. Some said he had become a legend among the free folk, a king who did not sit a throne, but ruled the untamed lands beyond it. Others claimed he had simply disappeared, his fate unknown, his life unwritten. But in Westeros, legends never truly die. Perhaps one day, when the cold rises again, when the winds howl with the whispers of the dead, the world will remember Jon Snow. And if that day comes, perhaps he will return, or perhaps he never left at all. Not all kings wear crowns. Not all rulers sit upon thrones. Jon Snow had never been crowned, never adorned in gold, never named in the songs of bards who spun tales of heroes and legends. When the histories of Westeros were written, his name was not etched alongside the great conquerors, nor did his likeness grace the halls of kings. His bloodline, though noble, was buried in secrecy. His deeds, though great, faded into whispers. And yet, he had changed the fate of the realm more than any king before him. He had knelt before a queen to unite the living. He had led men into a battle no one else believed in. He had slain a tyrant at the cost of his own place in the world. But Westeros does not remember men like Jon Snow. The lords who gathered in the dragon pit did not speak his name when they chose a ruler. His fate was decided with barely a whisper, a punishment disguised as mercy. Exile, banishment to the very place where his journey had begun. No throne, no title, no claim to the legacy that was his by blood. Yet legacy is not written in crowns, nor is it measured by power. It lingers in the choices made, in the lives touched, in the silent echoes of a name spoken in the quiet corners of the world. Years passed, and still, his presence was felt in the north. The free folk told stories of the man who had united them, who had fought for them when no one else would. The north remembered the boy raised among Starks, the one who had defended Winterfell not for power, but for duty. But elsewhere, in the halls of lords and kings, his name became a fading echo. Some spoke of him as the last Targaryen, a prince who had refused his birthright. Others whispered that he had been nothing more than a Stark bastard who had wandered beyond the wall and vanished into legend. But legends do not die so easily. For even as time erased him from the histories, even as new rulers rose and fell, there remained those who wondered, where had Jon Snow gone? What had become of the man who had once defied fate itself? And in the cold winds that swept beyond the wall, in the endless white where few dared to tread, some say he still walked, a forgotten king, a ruler of nothing, and yet a man whose choices had shaped everything. Prophecies are not written in stone. They are whispered in the dark, carried on the tongues of dreamers and madmen, twisted by time, until they are no longer truth, but legend. For centuries, the prophecy of Azor Ahai had loomed over Westeros like a shadow. A prince, born amidst salt and smoke, destined to wield a burning sword and drive back the darkness. A warrior chosen by fate, a savior who would turn the tide of a war not yet fought. Rhaegar Targaryen had believed in this prophecy with all his heart. He had spent his life searching for the one who would fulfill it. And when his first son was born, he had been certain. He was the prince that was promised. But the gods are cruel. Rhaegar fell in battle. His son, Aegon, was slain in his cradle. His dreams of prophecy turned to dust. And yet, the words of the prophecy remained, lingering like an unanswered question. If the prince was meant to be born again, if the long night was to return, then the world would need its savior. For years, the world forgot. And then, in the frozen north, a bastard boy was raised in the halls of Winterfell. A boy who did not seek destiny. A boy who never wished to be king, who had never dreamed of prophecy, who had never claimed to be the savior the world had been waiting for. But Jon Snow had done what no king, no warrior, no lord had ever done. He had led the living against the dead. He had ridden into the heart of winter itself. He had wielded Valyrian steel against an enemy that could not die. And when the dawn broke over the battlefield, when the long night had been cast back into the abyss, he still stood. But was he Azor Ahai? The prophecy spoke of a flaming sword, yet Jon's blade burned with nothing but cold steel. It spoke of a chosen warrior, yet Jon had never claimed to be one. It spoke of a prince, yet Jon was not raised as one, nor had he ever sought a throne. And so, the question remained, had the prophecy been fulfilled? Or had it been nothing more than a tale, a story spun by desperate men seeking meaning in the chaos of war? Some say Jon Snow was the chosen one, that his actions, his sacrifices, his battles had brought the dawn, that he had been Azor Ahai, but had never needed to claim the title, that he had saved the world not because of fate, but because of choice. Others say the prophecy remains unfulfilled, that the prince who was promised is yet to come, that one day another will rise, one who wields the blade of fire, one who will truly bring the dawn. But the truth, as always, is lost to time. And if Jon Snow was the prince that was promised, then perhaps prophecy itself had never mattered at all. Bloodlines do not simply vanish. They fade, they fracture, they slip into the shadows of history, but they do not die. Jon Snow was the last known Targaryen, the last son of Rhaegar, the final ember of a dynasty that had once set the world ablaze. When he rode beyond the wall, His name faded from the histories, his claim to the throne buried beneath the ashes of war. The Targaryen line had ended. Or had it? Whispers linger in the forgotten corners of Westeros, in taverns along the King's Road, in the flickering candlelight of old archives, in the wind that howls through the ruins of Valyria. There are those who believe that the blood of the dragon still flows, hidden in places where the lords of the realm do not think to look. Some claim that Jon fathered a child before his exile, a secret heir carried in the womb of some nameless woman far from the eyes of the court. If true, that child would be of both Stark and Targaryen blood, a union of ice and fire greater than any prophecy could have foretold. But if such an heir exists, where would they be? Perhaps in the north, where the free folk do not care for names, only for survival. Perhaps among the last remnants of House Targaryen's loyalists, hidden away in some distant land, waiting for a time when blood alone could forge a claim. Or perhaps the truth is even more elusive. Perhaps Jon himself was not the last. The Targaryens were known for their secret affairs, their hidden bastards, their whispers of dragon seed scattered throughout Westeros. Could there be others, descendants of old, unaware of the fire that sleeps within their veins? Or is it possible that Jon himself was never meant to be the end of the line? That bloodlines are more than just names and crowns? That legacy is not measured in heirs, but in the choices one makes, the ripples they leave behind in the world? If the blood of the dragon still flows, it does so in silence, waiting. For history has shown one undeniable truth. Targaryens do not simply disappear, they return. And when they do, the world changes. A king without a crown, a hero without a home, a name that fades with time, yet refuses to be forgotten. Jon Snow rode into exile, but exile is not always the end of a story. Sometimes it is only the beginning of a legend. History has seen it before. Rulers cast into the unknown, only to return when the world had forgotten them, when the kingdom they left behind had fallen into ruin, when prophecy and fate wove their names back into the fabric of destiny. Did Jon Snow truly leave Westeros behind? Or does the ghost of the White Wolf still linger in the cold winds beyond the wall? The histories tell of the last dragon lords of Valyria, who vanished into the smoking ruins of their fallen empire, never to be seen again. They tell of the Stark kings of old, who wandered into the long night and were lost to time, of men who were said to be dead, only to reappear when the world needed them most. Jon Snow, son of ice and fire, may be no different. The free folk whisper of a figure clad in black, walking among them like a shadow of the past. A man with a dire wolf at his side, who watches, who waits, who doesn't forget. He did not return to claim a throne, nor to seek vengeance. He left the realm of men behind, but the realm of men is never done with its ghosts. Some say he will never return, that he has embraced the wild beyond the wall, that he has shed the burdens of his past, that he has become something else entirely, a figure of the North, no longer bound by the wars of men, but by something older, something deeper. But legends have a way of returning when the world least expects them. The last Targaryen to be exiled, Aegon the Unworthy's bastard son, disappeared into the east, only to return decades later with fire and blood. The last Stark to vanish beyond the wall, Bael the Bard, was thought lost forever, until his song was heard again. Will the White Wolf follow the same path? Perhaps one day, when the kingdoms below crumble, when a new darkness rises, when the world has all but forgotten his name, the North will send its ghost back into the world of the living. For even the coldest winters must end, and some kings do not stay lost forever. The blood of the dragon coursed through his veins, yet he never breathed fire. Jon Snow, the last son of Rhaegar Targaryen, carried a legacy older than the Seven Kingdoms themselves. The Valyrian bloodline, forged in flame and conquest, had shaped the history of Westeros for centuries. Kings and queens, tyrants and saviors, all had risen and fallen under the weight of the Targaryen name. And yet, the last heir, the one with the truest claim, rejected the throne that had consumed generations before him. Why? Was it because he had been raised as a Stark, taught honor over ambition, duty over desire? The words of his father, no, his uncle, had shaped him from childhood. The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword, not fire and blood, not the dragon must have 3 heads. Or was it something deeper? Perhaps the throne itself rejected him. The Iron Throne had been built for dragons, yet Jon had never tamed one. Daenerys, with her fire-kissed soul, had walked through flames and emerged unburnt. A true Targaryen, as the world would call her. But Jon? He had never been tested by fire. He had never shown the gifts of his ancestors. Even his own dragon, Rhaegal, had died beneath him. What if Jon Snow was never meant to rule? Rhaegar Targaryen had believed in prophecy. He had believed that his son would be Azor Ahai, reborn, the prince who was promised, the savior who would wield Lightbringer against the darkness. But when the long night came, Jon did not strike the killing blow. Arya Stark did. The prince that was promised, the heir of the Dragon Lords, had been nothing more than a soldier in the Great War, one of many who fought in the dark, a king that never was, a savior who did not save. Did Jon refuse his heritage, or did his heritage refuse him? Perhaps the greatest irony of all is this. Throughout history, it was fire that consumed the Targaryens, but Jon Snow chose to let it die. He did not seek vengeance for his queen. He did not seek to reclaim his birthright. He let the throne melt into ruin, let the kingdom move on without him. Fire can destroy, but it can also be extinguished. Jon Snow was a Targaryen, but he did not burn. Perhaps that was his destiny all along. He left no crown, no throne, no kingdom. Only footprints in the snow, soon to be swallowed by the endless white. Jon Snow, the last Targaryen, the lost Stark, the unwilling king, rode beyond the wall and vanished into the unknown. The world he left behind moved on, its rulers reshaped, its battles settled, its war songs quieted. But silence does not mean an ending. Some names refuse to die. There are whispers in the north. Travelers speak of a lone rider moving like a shadow through the forests of the free folk. A man dressed in black, his dire wolf at his side, his eyes filled with the weight of ghosts. No one knows where he is going. No one knows if he will ever return. But stories have a way of surviving longer than the men who live them. The wall itself stands, but what lies beyond it is unknown. The others were defeated, but are they truly gone? The North remembers. But what does it remember of Jon Snow? The bastard who was never a bastard, the king who never ruled, the warrior who never sought war. Is his exile a conclusion? Or is it merely another beginning? After all, history is nothing more than a cycle, an endless turning of the wheel. And in the darkest nights, when the world begins to forget, the echoes of old legends stir. Perhaps, one day, when Westeros finds itself again at the edge of ruin, when shadows creep over the world once more, when the long night threatens to fall again, a ghost may rise from the snow, because some flames never die. They simply wait.